I don't know if you're aware that the Tim Phillips's Storm Bay
It's the same.
is
bit wide
within 6 inches, except the transom's wider on the Storm Bay for fishing.
for having a boat guy with a pole on
yeah,
over
and all that stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The
But
rest-
also Beamier altogether, wasn't it?
No. I think the same, pretty much. Well, Tim says within 6 inches,
Oh, really?
which is close. Yeah,
So
yeah. But
that's
fatter,
obviously took where the keel was the wet well and the
Yeah.
centreboard.
Yeah, Bliss didn't have it. It had a full keel even when they ran it up on the beach at Wonthaggi, you know, in the 60s or something like that. It had internal ballast with concrete and railway lines and push bikes and any sort of shit they could find. They rattled all that out, put galvanised iron frames in it all the way through, all floors all the way through it.
Right.
And made it stronger than an outside ballast, a lead outside ballast, which improved the whole thing a lot.
Okay, let's dive in right at the beginning. When did the spark of the idea of going to the Americas?
Well, I was sailing out of Royal Yacht Club Victoria, and at that stage I was sailing on, I think I was sailing on Sarifa, which is a little savage, we got fifth in the Sydney Hobart in it, it wasn't too slouch. John Jarrett then had a hard chine steel boat, which he called Athena, which he built in 19 weeks from go to woe in his workshop, the whole boat. And he was an unusual character as much as he says, oh, it was an overnight race, we go, and he says, oh, it's not going to be windy enough, you blokes can take it. So we used to just take his boat, which was unusual for a fella to just give us his yacht.
So these were Bass Strait races? Or
Yeah, we did Bass Strait or around the bay races or any of that sort of stuff. And if it was going to be windy, invite me, otherwise, just take it, which we did. And we were doing, we kept on mumbling after yachting drinks. He said we should go to the America's Cup, it'll be, that'd be the best way to go. And that was, I think it was around about Christmas time.
Hold on, so the America's Cup we're talking about is
Dame Paddy,
which is 67.
Yeah.
And so that would have been the summer of 67,
Summer
so
of
August, July, August, something like that was when the racing was.
Yeah, so the
Christmas beforehand.
Christmas before that, and his, we had his little 32 footer out in the yard. He says, I reckon I could cut it in half, put 10 foot in it, which is some turn into he said, make it about 43, use the mainmast as the mizzen, and I'll get a new alloy stick. And I said, it won't take me that long. And he said, so it was hard chine, so it was just plates, yeah. And when we were painting the yard, we put a dotted line around the middle of it and said, cut here, and so forth. We did jokingly anytime. Yeah, a bit further aft and this sort of thing. Anyhow, he rang me within over that period of time and said, you still want to go to the America's Cup? I said, well, but what about the boat? He said, I've chartered the Winston Churchill off the Warner family. And he said, there's a bit of work to do on it. He says, because he'd had a look at it. And he'd looked at another couple of boats. I don't know if you're familiar with another boat called Roma, which was... Roama, I think.
Jenkins owned it. The Commodore of St Kilda. Roama, a Searle-built boat.
About the same size.
53.
Yeah. But that
died about a month ago.
Oh, okay. So he tried to get hold of that and couldn't get hold of it, which he thought would be ideal too. Anyhow, he approached Graham Warner, and the deal was, because they were involved with electronics on board Dame Paddy, with the minimal electronics they had in those days. He chartered. He says, when were we going? He says, well, it's got to be soon. He said 5 or 6 weeks. So I was working the family business then, so I had to tell him I was retiring for a while I went yachting. You pulled the rig out, and the rig in those days was what you call, I don't know what the terminology is, but it had strops and chocks and on the wooden mast. So and if you lost a bit of rigging, it was a loop with a chock on the side, like they do. No hounds or anything like that. So he took the mast out and took it round to his workshop and fabricated all the fittings and so forth in steel, and had them galvanised. So redid the whole mast, so it had individual added stays on everything. Took out a storage cupboard and put in a big tank because he didn't reckon there was enough tankage in it. Redid the water tank, took the engine out, and went from a 2-to-1 reduction to a 3-to-1 because it's got to be efficient, and his numbers said had to be efficient for cruising. And we still had to carry. We used to carry 200-litre drums on the deck, one each side when we were going a long trek.
So before he chartered it, where was it?
It was just sailing and
in the bay.
Yeah, sailing in the bay, and it had actually just been de-rigged because when the Warners were racing it, it had a 10-foot bowsprit. It had about a 6-foot bumpkin, and it was a yawl. Had a yawl stepped aft. The spinnaker pole was 33 foot long, so the J measurement was 33. They cut down to 23, and so they de-rigged it for cruising. And Sir Arthur Warner, who'd retired then, was going to just cruise up the Barrier Reef with him. He had a boatman who was looking after the boat named Reuben Norblum, and Reuben's still alive. Halfway up to the Queensland coast, Sir Arthur departed this world, and so they came back, and she was just racing around the bay like that, and that was probably about around the same time. Anyhow, Graham agreed for John to charter it for 12 months on the condition that he could use it in Newport, which was no big deal. The biggest trouble with Winston is she motored about 7 knots, and the America's Cup course is out of the Brenton Light or wherever it is. It's 15 miles out to sea, so it was a 2-hour run to get out there to the start and so forth. And after a couple of days, we had to leave at 7 o'clock in the morning for a midday start and all this sort of stuff. All the other big super power boats had come charging out over the horizon.
So to go back, so he chartered the boat and you did some work on it.
Yeah.
And who was in the crew?
The crew was John, myself, Jeff Ewanson, who we'd been sailing out of Royals. I used to sail down here with a kid with Jeff. Two guys drove over when they read in the paper that John was talking about taking it. Drove over from South Australia, John Manson and David Roshheim. They drove over from West Australia and parked on his front door and says, I said you want the extra crew, and John says, oh, okay, you'll do. And they hadn't had any ocean experience at all, except they'd done bay racing, but no ocean experience. And a fella called Wilson Hissey, and Wilson Hissey had done cruising in the Pacific in a boat that he built himself and so forth. Wilson was in his he would have been 50 or close to 60, and he actually turned out Wilson wasn't that helpful. He wasn't that active. It was the problem. So
was it just out through the heads and turn left?
When we went and we'd done all this preliminary work, and he said the best way to go is to go west, because it's as long as you get away by April, the highs are still sitting in the bight, so you can go across the top of the highs, get southeasterlies. You might get a couple of fronts come through, but they'll be fast moving, so blah blah. Then high into the Indian Ocean to get the trades across to Mauritius down. The next tough bit would be round the Cape of Good Hope, and then up the Atlantic the same again. And we were going to go from Cape Town across to south of to Recife, where the track is up that way, and we lost our steering gear off Cape Town, so we had to go back in. We went into Walvis Bay, which was according to the pilot books, and that was and there was no sort of electronic coverage of anything in those days. The pilot book said there was a fishing port with 400 trawlers in there, and John said, well, we'll be able to fix the steering in there. So we were 450 miles out into the Atlantic, and we ran back into Walvis Bay, and we got in there before noon, and the charts, which we only had a big scale chart of that area, 300 miles of unidentifiable undulating sand dunes. just ridiculous. So we hit the coast and we had to hang around. We didn't know if to go left or right to get to Walvis Bay. And we're actually only 12 miles south, so we had to motor up.
So just backtrack a bit. So you left Melbourne. Next stop.
Next stop was the Perth.
So you stopped in Perth.
Stopped in Perth, Fremantle. We got a few extra things that we'd missed out on. The unusual part about it was when we left Melbourne, we said we'll just go over to the motorboat club and fill it up with diesel. Then we're going now. We better go and fill her up. And one of the new tanks that had fitted, they hadn't put the bloody drain plug in the bottom.
It just kept going out.
So I put it in the bloody diesel all around the floor, so that didn't smell too good. So on the way, he spoke to his man in his mechanic in Melbourne, and he left his business in Melbourne to his two workers who were just going to operate it and do what he did. He'd rebuild equipment and so forth. So they met us. He said, "Oh, we'll go to Port Fairy," which was easy access. So we gave him a rough time. We went in there and picked up 1.25 inches of bloody plug, which I filled it up, opened the diesel, put it in, filled it up, and then headed off to Fremantle. We had a good one good gale before Fremantle. It was about all I went through actually, and I found we had through about seven sessions of heavy weather. Not what would you call earth shattering or both of them, but quite heavy weather. And Winston didn't go to weather that well. She was fat forward and long and didn't beat that well. She was fine running and reaching was perfect. Yeah, it was a nice long run keel, ran straight and so forth. And if you see Surgeon's got a backwards facing wheel. Yeah, steer behind your back. Yeah, which is very. I've only ever seen a couple of boats.
So adding up, there was 7 of you.
Yeah, 6 of us. Six of us left Melbourne. We got to Mauritius. That was a 20-odd day run, something like that. Stayed there for a week, and every port we went to, we stayed longer, and then we had to leave faster. It was a yacht race. We're up changing spinnakers in the middle of the night and changing sails. We had a bell in the wheelhouse which went into the main cabin. You turn the bell on if you wanted a hand, and come up and we'd be changing bloody sails in the middle of the night.
This is because you were worried about getting there before the Americans.
We had to get there in time for the America's Cup. And as I said, every port we went to, we stayed longer, and so we had to sail faster.
So Port Louis in Mauritius.
Port Louis, but the yachties there said Port Louis is just a dirty little port. Or it probably still is. We're invited by the yacht club to go up to Grand Bay, which is about 10k up. There's a beautiful spot up in there. And we anchored in there and stayed there for about 4 or 5 days.
And then from there to Cape Town, or
there we went from there to Durban. We had some heavy weather. We picked up 150 miles off Durban by whale spotters. A little twin-engine thing came to zoom, and I said, "Shit, this is bloody unusual. What are they doing out here?" And they were whale spotting aircraft, and there was still an operational whale station running out of Durban in those days with about 10 chasers. And they said, "You've got 130 miles to go." We met them there. They actually over the next couple of days we were there. They took us out for a flight to go and whale spotting, which was amazing. I mean, they had just a plotting sheet, and they'd ring up the closest, and the whale chasers are about 200 foot steam powered, because they can stop the engine to start quicker and turn quicker. They're about 150 foot or 200 foot, very fast, and they'd ring up the closest whale chaser and tell him, and they'd drop a canister of dye marker out the window where the whale was, and the whale chaser would come over and shoot the whales, and they monitored the 10 whale chasers which were out there zigzagging up and down the coast looking for whales. Yeah,
so what sort of comms did you have in those days? Did you have VHF?
No, there was no VHF. Astor being Warner's being in the radio. So we had a buddy I think it was an American Raytheon, half the size of a bloody fridge it was, a transmitter. We could never ever work the thing very well. We could get it was on HF 2182, and we did actually get a signal out from a day out of Mauritius to Perth and tell them, we're still talking. It was quite, unusual to talk to Perth from that far away on the night signals, but we never really mastered. We used to stay down 2182 and 2524. That was all, which was not at long range compared with the facilities now. I mean, it actually had, the equipment was a compass. It had I don't know if you remember those old-fashioned sun logs, which were a cable-driven, about a 3-inch plastic propeller, which did about 5,000 miles and they blew up. All the rest was a Walker trailing log.
And who was doing the nav? Were you doing the nav?
John was taught himself navigation, so we had 3 sextants. He was in the disposal business, so we had 3 sextants out of lifeboats and so forth. 2 4-inch ones and a 6-inch one.
Chronometer.
Chronometer, but it was only out of an aircraft and a front wind, 24-hour dial on it, and we kept it in a little box with lambswool in it and wound it every day at midday, and that was there. And then we also had a Panasonic, which you could dial up on the 20-metre band or something like that. You can dial up a time clock, time clock. The pips, dial up the pips, which goes 24. I've forgotten the frequency, and we dial that up and then have our correction book where the clock was 3 seconds slow or 5 seconds slow and so forth. We did that every day. It was part of the thing. And I don't know if you do celestial navigation. I used to be able to do it with you've got to have 3 telephone books and all the tables, get everything right and guess it. And our first long distance run was from Perth to Mauritius, and John said, he says, we should see the Port Louis or the top light at about 9:15 or something like that tonight. He says, I reckon we should be able to pick up the loom of that, blah blah blah. And anyhow, I went down to Simon and says, John, you're 10 minutes early. He said, why? I said, all the loom's coming up now.
He would have been pleased with that.
So we were quite confident about his navigating. And he was an excellent navigator. He taught us all how to do the slight reductions and go through the tables and so forth. And it was a procedure. You had to do it. It was a procedure every day. You had to get up and get the sun. It was rising quickly in the morning, take a few shots and blah blah.
And you'd do a noon sight.
Then we'd get a noon sight when we were getting close to noon, and we'd have to calculate we're being west for so many days, so noon's going to be up past 3 in the afternoon until we sort of better put a correction in and get back to some real time, because it was just you were self-contained on the boat, so it didn't matter what time it was.
So, Durban and a quick stop in Cape Town?
Durban, we went down, we left Durban and over the east coast of
you've got what's it called? The
Agulhas. We left with a forecast of southwest heavy winds of 20 to 30 and 20. Well, we got to go there, you bastards will never get out of the place because we're having such a party there. Left there, and we really got a serious hiding coming out of there. Plus, we were probably been overindulging a little bit. We finished up we reckoned we couldn't get a sight. It was overcast. It was going south with about a southwest, 30, 40 knots. Short, steep seas, and against the Agulhas current, which makes them stand up as well as like the east coast of Australia when they get the current running fast with the saline against it. Bloody awful. We actually shifted bulkheads up in the bow. It hadn't been shifted when she'd run up on the bed. It was hitting that hard. Was leaking relatively badly. We were pumping every hour when we got to Cape Town. So we pulled it out at Cape Town and gave it a quick cork up the bow. Found a couple of bloody stop leaks that were dripping and so forth, and gave it a quick coat of paint to make it make it a bit tight. It was good after that. Actually, we actually found a butt stop up in their bow that hadn't even had any stopping behind it, which had been there for years. And I know the old yachties, mates of mine, that used to sail on, which as soon as the 5-minute gun went, you'd have to start bailing.
So, I mean, this is something I was going to ask you about, and we'll come back to the rest of the trip in a minute. But you know, Percy Coverdale boat, famous yacht builder, Tasmanian. I mean, was it a quality boat? Where did you get the feeling it was, or did you get the feeling it was sort of thrown together a bit? I mean, what's your gut feeling?
Well, no, John always said that the size, because it was originally built as a cutter, and Warner's extended, put the bowsprit on, put a stern, a bumpkin on it, had a mizzen in it, you know, which was, I think they said it was 36 foot high, the mizzen and so forth, 33 foot spinning pole, so it was completely overstressed. It didn't have a lot of, he was building fishing boats and stuff, didn't have a lot of strength and so forth in it, and so it was probably, you'd call it probably just loose.
Yeah.
And we never had the rigging. Was, you know, rigging with the John's theory was that maybe it was just to hold the mast up. You didn't have to have a bar tight and all this sort of stuff like they do with the boats now. Nothing like it.
Yeah. So it's just had a hard life.
Yeah, it is. It'd been worked hard, but it's been up on the bottom, of course, you know, and so forth. Yeah.
So going back, so we've got the Cape Town, a bit of a refit there,
pulled it out, gave it a scrub, did a bit of stopping, and then
an
took
emergency stop in Walvis Bay.
Yeah, emergency stop in Walvis Bay. The steering was, John never liked it, and weekly we'd take that was the steering department under there, including the autopilot motor and so forth, was all under there, and it was exposed worm and ring gear, what you'd say, a worm and a ring gear, and it just, the worm gear just fell in half, and there was nothing we could do about it. We had the regulation, being an ocean racer, I had regulation emergency tiller, which wasn't as long as the rudder, it was about 3 foot long.
And because it would have to fit in between the cabin house.
Yeah, no, it was there. We took the wheel off, we took the box off, and just had and it was a wooden trunk rudder. It was a wooden, about a 6-inch, teak or whatever it was, wooden trunk. So we put the emergency steering, just screwed it into the top, and had the motor sail back in. You could only do it by trimming the sails and leaning on the thing. It was 400. I think it's 3 days to come in, or 3 or 4 days to get back into the coast, and then they put on the mechanics or the engineers at the Walvis Bay put on a Radicon reduction box, which was a huge piece of equipment and so forth, and it was much smoother, much better steering after that. Fortunately, they also John says, "Oh, don't worry about the bloody automatic pilot." Says, "Oh, bugger that, if they can put it on and get the thing on." So they did. They fitted the automatic pilot back on it too, and as far as I know, it's still the same steering gear it had on that day, because it was really, really well done. Took them 8 days or something like that to fit it. So it was a fairly major job, to get down to. By the time they machined all the bits up and mounted it all and fitted the wheel back in the same place. We're going to go across to South America to Recife, and he said, "Oh, we'll have to adjust because we're 4 days in, 4 days to get back on our track, and we're 8 days there, so we've lost about nearly two and a half weeks or something like that." So he said, "We'll run straight through. We'll stop at Ascension Island and then Bermuda," and that wasn't the way we were originally going to plan to go to Recife and up through the Caribbean. But anyhow, so we went from there to Ascension Island. Ascension Island is a cable and wireless relay station.
Yeah, there's no anchorage.
Nothing there. You just anchor out in the rollers out in the ocean. And we launched the dinghy and went ashore. And we held our flag, put up our yellow flag. No one came out. There's a bloke running around the workboat going to a tanker which was pumping fuel ashore and so forth. And I said, "Well, is there any customers?" No, mate. No, there's a Yankees. None of that stuff here, pal.
Ascension Island and Bermuda?
Yeah, then straight to Bermuda, and that was like straight through the southern Atlantic, the North Atlantic, supposed to be through the doldrums, and that we had a brilliant sail. We did it in I'd have to look at the book. I think we had the Spinnaker up for 11 days or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, non-stop.
We
We averaged 175 miles a day, which was.
So the doldrums weren't a big issue.
Didn't have any doldrums whatsoever, none, just for some pure luck.
So you caught up a bit of time on
We
that.
caught up a bit of time, so that means we could stay longer in Bermuda. Bermuda's an absolutely beautiful spot, but compared to for little Aussie guys from there, it's horrendously expensive, just ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it. I've got it in here. I left Bermuda $300 lighter, which was
In those
a
days,
lot. It was a lot of money. There was 2 cruise liners a week coming, because it's only was it 700 or 800 miles from New York. 2 cruise liners a week were coming in. With,
it's the same as the Sydney Hobart. 6:30.
Yeah.
6:30 Newport, Bermuda at 6:30. So
Yeah. But it doesn't matter.
I'll have a look at that in a minute. And so you had a bit of a rest in Bermuda.
Bermuda, we didn't do anything. We met some interesting people there. Amazing. And then we left, and that's about. I better get the times, didn't I? July, August. Started Bermuda, and left Hambledon Harbour. That was August 15th. So we were there a week. We departed Bermuda on the 27th of August. Yeah, less $300. Arrived in Newport on the 31st. So it was a 3-day run to Newport. We got to Newport, and if you've been up in those waters, you can get wind and fog there. It's painful because of the Gulf Stream and so forth. I mean, here if it's foggy, there's no bloody wind. But there it's foggy and windy all at the same time. And they got those Dongan boys, boys with bell boys and so forth. Yeah, which was a bit. We hit it pretty well smack on, but we didn't have any there was no small ships radar in those days. Anyhow, it was all just on compass and bearing
and so, how long before the Cup was this?
I'm just trying to think. I must have been. We got there on the last day, 1st of September, and I think the Cup races were about because when I'm in port, there's no nothing listed till we left. We were there for a month. Right. Yeah. But a couple of times we go out to the race in Winston, but it was hard. It was a long day to get out there to the start and so forth. A couple of times we went out there and it was fog and called off and so forth.
And did you know any of the guys who were sailing? And
I knew, yeah, we knew a lot. We knew a few of the guys who were sailing on Dame Paddy. Yeah. But,
and what do you sort of remember about the atmosphere there in terms of?
Well, the funny thing, that was the year that the Contender finished up being Intrepid. Yeah. Intrepid really was a breakthrough in 12 metres because it had the twin rudder. It was still an RIC constructed timber boat, blah blah blah. But it was a bit of a breakthrough, and it had the trim tab on the back of the keel, another rudder twin, and it was really. In fact, it contended. I think another 4 or 8 years later, they gave it a refurbish and it contended again.
And won again.
Yeah, it did, and won again. Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. And if you look at the history of 12 metres, I mean, if you've got a 1935 Model 1 and a 1967 Model 1 or something, there's only about a couple of minutes, so they're looking for nth degrees of improvement, which when you see the research, where they're going to sail in such and such waters, well, their average wave height is this, and the distance between pitches, and they go through all this sort of technology to try and get the ultimate hull to sail in a particular area. I'm not particularly excited about the new America's Cups. They're just
no. You know, the thing that I miss most is crew work.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean,
And you know, to tell you the truth, I mean, I know they go fast nowadays, but until a few years ago, I could go faster on my bicycle than the fastest yacht in the world.
That's right.
Years ago.
Yeah,
so speed isn't really what it's about.
No, but it was about skill in managing the sails and rapid management of the sails and doing it correctly. Selection of the sails and selection of the wind and the place to go, because nothing happened that fast. Now they're doing 100 k's, zing, 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 zing.
Yeah.
They don't even get off. They don't even get off the bloody Zoom or whatever they call it. They're like turning around, just like a motorboat, you know. They drive with steering wheels and crash helmets and bloody safety gear.
And then after the cup, what happened? Because it's a bit like skiing. The downhill bit's fun, and then afterwards you've got to get back up.
Well, then we had to get home. One of the guys, Jeff Ewanson, he didn't come back. John was worried about Wilson, he wasn't that active, and so he said, "Look, you know, I'm worried about you going back across the Pacific. It's such a long stretch." He said, "I don't think you can come back with us."
Well, just for health.
Just for health, we were just worried about him because he wasn't that healthy. Jeffrey, he flew home to cancel his engagement and reapply because he fell in love in Newport.
All right. So he was engaged to somebody in Australia.
Yeah, he was engaged to somebody in
awkward,
Australia. Yeah, it was with that. I said, "No, bugger it." I said, "Look, it's only going to take us 3 months to get home. Just come home and sort it out then." But he was insistent, so. He stayed there for, well, he departed this world about 2 years ago, and when he was just 80. Got three kids there. One of them unfortunately departed this world, Jeffrey Bjornson Jr., and he is quite an identity amongst the sailors. He's a professional sailor. He'd come out to here a couple of times. We picked up a guy called Ken Pittman who had been sailing around the Caribbean with a rider there who'd gone up to Newport. He'd come up to Newport on his boat called Murray Davis, who was a yachting rider of those, Australian yachting rider. And he said, "We're coming to Australia," and they said, "Oh, okay, well you can come." So he immigrated to Australia by yacht. Trip home was good. The people asked me what was the most frightening part, and I said the most frightening part of the whole bloody trip was going through Panama Canal. I mean, it's for starters, you've got to go through with the steam, and they're not going to let 40 squillion gallons of water out just to put one yacht up. We had I don't know if you're familiar with a little folk boat. We had a folk boat strapped alongside us, a raft alongside, because he couldn't. You had to go in with the ship, go up with the ship, down with the ship, through the canals with the ship, and go down on the Pacific side with the ship. And we had a 25-foot folk boat because he couldn't motor quick enough with his little putt he had in it. So we had to tow him through. We rafted him up going into the canal, into the locks, and the first lock is the first lock, and we're only 10 metres behind a great big steamer, and the first lock, it's all done by gravity from the water, and it's a 90-foot lift. So the first lock is a fair bit of water pressure. It's a 90-foot lift, and the valves are 16 foot in diameter. So it's like being in the bloody river rapids, and there's none of those drogue engines on the side that handle yachts. You got to do it yourself with 4 ropes and so forth, and just feed the ropes out. We were pinging cleats off and so forth, and we had the what's the name beside the 25 beside us. We had to have a pilot on, and the folk boat rafted alongside us had to have a pilot too. It was a tonnage rate. I'd be quizzing. I think it was something like 25 cents a ton or somewhere. Our fee for going through was about $7, and the boat we had rafted up on side us, and we had to pay extra. I think it was an extra $5 each boat for the pilot's lunch. We went 20 odd days. We went through the the Marquesas group first. One stop there. Read the pilot books and said we'll be able to get meat and vegetables and blah blah blah. we went to the trading store. It was funny, anchored off and had to row in. Went up this little village, Heveroa, and we said, we want 6 dozen. He says, I'll give you 6 eggs. No, we want 6 dozen. You got any meat? Oh, no goat. That's all they had was goat, so no, we had to scratch that. Then we went into the tomatoes, a little low island, Takaroa. We stayed there a couple of days, and then went through to Tahiti, Papeete, you know, just the ultimate sort of yachty cruising port, I guess you'd say.
And in those days, it was before it was spoiled. You know, I think it's not so good these days.
I think it's probably more commercial, but we met a fella, I can't think of his name, Driver. He was on about a 60-foot yacht sailboat called Driver. He was on a round the world cruise with his family, and he got to Australia actually a couple of years later. We met up with him when he got to Australia with his family. I think it was the Canberra, one of the Australian passenger ships berthed in it. I think it's the Canberra. I'm trying to think. It came in there for a regulation stop, and I said to the other crew, I said, "Come on, let's go down to the Canberra." So Aussie comes from Aussie, because some Aussie Sheilas on there, walk along the dock, and would, you know, as true as I stand here, from, you know, third deck up, I said, "G'day, Warren, how you going?" I said, "See, I told you there's some Sheilas here we know." And it was a girlfriend of a friend I'd seen off 3 years before at Station Pier when the regulation trip overseas you had to go by ship, and I'd seen her off. The funny part about it, when that ship left, I think it was the Canberra, she clipped the edge of the reef going out. It's a very tight passage out of Papeete. Clipped it, punched a hole in it, so she had to come back in, and they'd bring 6 concrete trucks down and fill up the bloody hole in the front where it was. They were actually sick of Tahiti by the time it had been. They were there probably a week, and we were a week. We then ran out of. We went across. It was just before Christmas. He's not going to leave her there for Christmas, so he says, "Oh, we'll leave. We'll go to Moorea, and we could leave Moorea Island." So it was about a 10-mile across to Moorea, and we left, stayed there, and left Moorea, and then went from Moorea to Rarotonga, which is 600 or 700 miles. I'm trying to remember.
And was there a little harbour in Rarotonga, Avachu or something?
No, it was.
Or you anchored off the main town?
No, we came in and anchored at the little harbour, and that was where the that famous cruising yacht was Square Rigger Yankee. And Yankee was just up the beach and wrecked on there, and that she'd only been wrecked 1964 or something like that. That she was wrecked on Rarotonga, and we actually went over and saw the wreck, and it was holed, and it was and the tide was coming in, and if they had better equipment or something, they would have got it off, because he just rolled up onto the reef, but it was then been there about 3 years, and there's still charts rolling around inside, and crockery. The natives had pinched all the stuff they thought was good. They didn't want all these charts and bits of cutlery and crockery, so we ratted a few bits of that. Then we just went from there to Auckland.
Oh, you went straight from Auckland, straight from Raro to Auckland.
Straight from Rarotonga, did no stops there, because John, when we left, he says he was going to be back in the first week of February. Now, departed Auckland on the 22nd of January, so he's had to get home in the first week of February, is what John said he was going to do. And we arrived back just a big hours, and that was, I remember that. As soon as that was the first time I'd had my waterproofs on since Cape Town, when I got in the Bass Strait. all that way, first time I put my waterproof jacket on. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you were away for
about 10 months.
Less than a year.
Yeah, less than a year. Yeah, for 148. 148 there, 150 home or something like that. Yeah. And then.
And how old were were you at the time?
I was the oldest of the young blokes. I was 28.
So, one of my big issues is like, and I can hear this from a lot of people, the people nowadays are so risk averse, you know, like everything's I mean, I'm a big believer in safety and things like that, but I feel like it's almost making us less safe because we don't take any risks anymore. But even considered risks are seen as a bad thing. I mean, if I said to people now, I'm just going to go and sail around the world for the next 10 months.
Yeah.
You know, the weight of the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the...
Probably that, but I mean, we had to travel like a ship. Every port we went to, we had to have customs clearance and so forth, and they used to stamp the liquor cabinet and put a sticker over it and all this sort of stuff.
But more in terms of like your attitude for doing it.
Yeah.
You know, like I almost feel like we've lost that a bit.
Yeah. We were, when I say we were probably self-contained. I mean, when we took Churchill, she was 6 inches down on mast with all the crap. You would say crap. We had spare anchors, we had spare rigging, we had spare everything, spare starter motors and spare generators and all spare everything. We could fix everything, anything we could. Yeah, and we did. We had drills and bloody tools and the whole thing. We'd anything we needed, and an old woody like this is a fair bit of ongoing maintenance. When we left, we actually went down to the Warner's garage in Brighton, where they kept and went through all the sails. They had like literally bags and bags of used racing sails and went through the collection because I mean the sails were kept up in the forecastle up in the forward end with the crammed with sails. We even had, I think there's a shot here. Yeah, there's a shot of a bloody old sail tied up on the dock with a 44-gallon drum in front of it. So there's a 44-gallon drum. 44s used to sit nicely in there between the cabin and there. Just they'd slot in there and wouldn't put a couple of life jackets around, and they wouldn't rattle around too much. We got, when we were going through the boat, even after we left, we were thrown out. Whose is this? Wet weather gear stuff from other crew members and so. No, we don't have worse. Literally, then you just throw it over the side, throwing over rubbish and so forth. We actually found a survey, and it was a survey done for when they were turning it into. It was going north. They'd re-rigged it and so forth. And they'd had a survey done on it after it had been repaired and so forth. And Captain Bloggs, whoever his name was, went through it. He says, "This was built. This is correct. You suggested this wasn't not suitable for due to a low freeboard. It's not suitable for long ocean passages." Which is that's fairly challenging. Here we are across the Great Australian Bight. It's not suitable for long ocean passages.
And what happened to the? I mean, obviously we know what happened to the boat in the end, but. I mean, once she got back, did she stay? She went back
to Brighton. I think Brighton Yacht Club, and Graham used to let a fella called one of the old yachties, or it was an ocean racer then. Bernie Heath used to take juniors, give them a taste of ocean sailing on it. I used to go as the engineer, because I knew how all the bloody engines and everything else worked.
Well, you would have after 10 months.
10 months, and I used to do all the engine servicing and so forth, because John sort of thought I could do it all right.
And then and then she was sold to Sydney, and
she was sold to Sydney, and in fact, I think the fellow's original bloke, his name was Bert Newton. There's no relation to Bert Newton, but he was called Bert Newton. He took it over, and then he must have sold it to I think it was Winning, wasn't it? John Winning or something. John Winning, who had it when they lost it. Yeah, it was a tragedy. Yeah, it's probably still out there, bouncing along the bottom. After I finished sailing, I tried going back to the shoe factory, but that didn't work too much. So I went sailing. I went up sailing to north with a mate. We went as far as Cairns, and he got a workboat to do work both up and down. It was ex Torres Strait pilot vessel called the Torres 4. He got that to do work up and down. We used to do a bit of weekend pilotage and cart equipment up to the Cape Flattery where the silica mining was, and so they couldn't put them on light planes, and it was we could get up there quicker in the motorboat. It was only a 10-knotter than they could by truck, because it was 480 kilometres of rough roads and too hard and so forth, and impassable in the wet season and so forth. We did a few runs up there taking parts. I was working in a boatyard there, and just about Cup weekend, and the lightning, the afternoon storms were building up on the hills, and lightning hit a wheelbarrow 20 yards away. And I said, I think I'm getting sent a message, so I went straight to the travel agent and headed south. And when I about started, John was just starting to build a Banjo Patterson, and he says, you want to come and work there? So I worked for John for 2 years building the Banjo. Then
that was in Queensland.
No, in Northcote. He built it in Northcote. Yeah, the Banjo, which was a 60-foot steel cutter, a blown up Halverson, 38. Yeah, double-ended steel 60-foot flush deck, beautiful boat. I did a couple of Hobarts on it, and then my father thought I was turning into a bum, which I'm probably correct, and said that the ferry service between here and Queenscliff was for sale. The two old guys, Farnsworth brothers, were in their 70s and they're getting ready to retire. And he said, do you want to have a look at that? I'll bankroll you into it if you're interested. So I said, yeah, but I've got to go to Sydney, Hobart, and then I'll be back about February.